I know it's really, really scary. And I feel really grateful that I've been given this new perspective on everything because I feel like now I can see more what's going on, so I'm not so scared. And that I know that, like, there is actually, I would say, God, like a power that cares, even though it doesn't seem that way. It's just that we do have free will. So we have to live on earth with people who, like, do want to take away your freedoms or whatever. But there is more going on and it's not so hopeless. So, like, that helps me a lot. So that's another reason. I mean, it wasn't my initial reason, but another reason why I'm okay with stepping back, because I can see that the path is to not give energy to what isn't you don't like, and that actually involves giving up, well, the illusion of control over other people and thinking that, you know, if you just persuade them, they're going to listen. And like, it's not that that's not useful, but with the government, like, it is technically trying to force other people to do what you want to do. And I don't know the actual logistics to how it's going to work. But I do know that from the choices I make, that is just me choosing to spend my money where I know that the people are being treated well in, like, the global supply chain. That is more important than me, like, arguing with people online about some moral issue that I care about. So,
Well, that requires education. Then you have to be, you have to know where to invest your attention. So there still is a marketplace, let's say, for discovering that and for outlining the flaws in any given system, which aren't necessarily cultural war, it's infrastructure, knowledge, or knowing. So where do you derive your knowledge of that in order to make ethical decisions?
well, what happens is that, so I don't talk about this much, but I haven't eaten meat since for like 4 years now, like a really long time, or dairy. So I'm basically the V word, but I don't like labels. And I did that, and I do that for ethical reasons. And I realized that I could make the choice because, well, I worked on fishing boats. So I literally killed fish, which was actually a big catalyst to me changing my mind, because I was like in the environment and I saw, and I mean, like, I like cut heads open, the fish heads, and like took bones out. So like I was like, I don't think I want to do this. And then that shifted me inside, and I decided to do something else. And what happens with me is that I keep bumping up against feelings inside myself where I have to make a decision between this costs less, but I don't like the way they're doing it. This costs less, but I don't have enough information. It's mostly this costs less. I don't have enough information on how something was made. If it's a physical product, like the materials, I'm really concerned about like coercive labor, because that exists in the world, and child labor. And if the company doesn't even talk about it, I don't want to buy their products. I mean, I'm not 100% strict about that, because it's by people starting to care, people like me, the consumer, and then people who make the products, like it's like them making an internal shift to start creating almost like an alternative marketplace. And that takes time. So it's not like I can 100% eradicate all the things that I don't like from my life. And also, it literally takes time, because I can't just change overnight. You know, it's a gradual shift. So I keep bumping up against these feelings inside myself where it's like, well, I care, and am I going to choose between what's convenient for me or like what's convenient for everyone, which is like everyone involved in like the transaction, because I'm making the transaction all the way at the end, but there's like this whole thing before that in like basically the supply chain. And that's actually really hard to find. And I realized that this is the actual fight, in my opinion. It's like these little actions that we take every day, and being able to sacrifice, I don't know, your time. I guess it's mostly time, like your ability to buy something else, so you might have to wait for something. I think that the research happens when I just start trying to find what I can't find. And then I find like the one store or the one person, or like a forum post or something, and they direct it to something else, and then I do it bit by bit. So like, I don't know, with clothes or with food. There is also very personal aspect too, which I think comes from connecting to God, but not to say like the religious version of that, but
like a intuitive connection.
Yes. I mean, I think that we're, as humans, meant to be connected, all of us. So no one should have to tell anybody else anything. Like no one should have to teach you about God. If everything is working the way it's supposed to, like you know yourself. But I also think, and this ties into what I was about to say, that there is a battle happening where we're being disconnected from ourselves in really basic ways, like our water and our food. And I'd heard that all my life. But I didn't actually start eating healthier, and I what's that word? Is it the D word?
Deplorable, democratic.
What you do with the water to
desalinate? Desalinate?
No, it's another D word. Okay. I know it. It's where you boil the water and all the things.
Yeah.
The steam comes up and it captures the. Yeah. I just can't remember the word right now, but
yeah.
Basically,
distill.
Distill, yes. Okay. You purify the water, and we don't realize how important that is. Like just taking care of ourselves physically, and I also think that's why we're traumatized so much, because it's like everything is working together, like the environment. Like what I would call mind control with the news and the fear all the time. It's a way to disconnect us as just people from being in touch with ourselves. And then that gives you the room and the space to then start caring more about like the decisions you're making when you're buying and all that stuff. So it's all connected. And like, I'm not angry at anyone. I don't blame anyone for like not caring enough. It's just, I do know that that's the path to get there. So that was another big thing for me, that it's not disconnected from the making alternative choices thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you don't mind, and you can just skip this question, I'm just curious, rewinding the clock to childhood, usually people who come upon spirituality, there's a precedent there in their life. It's almost like a remembering rather than awakening, or a reawakening rather than completely out of the blue. But that's not for everybody. Everybody's got their own path toward rediscovering or discovering that connection, and connection might be like the most secular way that we can put this, just for anybody who's not comfortable with the language. But if people aren't, they can adjust their expectations. So I'm just wondering where that religious framework was in your childhood, or your relationship to spirituality or religion in your native country. If you recall that, and just hearing stories of like how ethnically God was spoken about, and or religion was used as a scaffold for society.
So I don't mind talking about this because I've mentioned this quite a few times. So I grew up in Jamaica, which is a very Christian country. So I was raised as a Christian.
And so we say Christian, but there's like 18,000 versions of that. So.
Yeah. Presbyterian.
Okay.
And I went to a Catholic school in Jamaica, which most schools in Jamaica are run by churches, so that's not special that it's religious. And I think I went to the best high school in the world, FYI, which I've also mentioned before a lot of times on social media. So I became agnostic when I was 14. And then at 28, 14 years later, changed my mind. And it absolutely had nothing to do with what anybody said to me. It was completely on my own. And it has been very mystical. So not something that I can discuss, which I'm not going to right here, with people that I like go to church with, for example, because God speaking to me, which I didn't even know was possible, which is actually kind of scary at the beginning, because it's like realizing that there is more to be perceived than what I was perceiving most of my life, and that most people are unaware of it. Um, um, so I think that what happened is my theological understanding of God comes through Christianity because of my upbringing. But God exists outside of that. It's just humans have to have a way to understand. And the way I can understand is through Christianity. So I don't know if that makes sense. So I think that we put God into boxes. I think God is love, if you were to give a term to that, but like, I don't know how. It's like, we are human, we're flawed. We do try to put, we're not going to, like, how do you say it? Humans are not going to 100% transform the way that they talk about God, or fit God into their already existing social structures overnight. It's just not going to happen, because I think that how do I say? I think that we're not perfect.
You don't say.
So we still have the desire to control others, and we still have the desire to fit God into what we already think, and so that is going to happen. I don't know if that makes sense. But,
so,
yeah.
what was the initiation or instigation of you becoming agnostic at 14? Did your brain just start being an argumentative little brat about everything? I'm not saying that you would ever be that way, but what was the process of like?
Yeah, it was very specific. Okay, well, I'll tell you what I thought the reason was, and then what I realized years later, meaning like recently, it actually was. So what I thought the reason was for the longest time was that it didn't make sense, which, by the way, it doesn't. It's not rational. And
What
I know
didn't make
people,
sense? That
religion and Christianity and the Bible, and
okay.
I was like, it doesn't make sense. And specifically, I got very upset because I heard about bombs being dropped on children in Afghanistan. And I was like, well, they're Muslim, they're not Christian. So, like, I can't worship, or I can't agree with some religion that excludes, like, some group of innocent kids just because they were born into, like, a household that didn't, follow the Christian gospel. So that was it. It was like, it doesn't make sense. And, like, morally, I disagree with what I've learned. So that was the reason. That I thought. But the reason that I realized actually was because I had been hurt by my experiences in life. And that made me lose trust in God. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but that was the actual reason that I didn't realize until years later. But I had a more well thought out reason for that.
Mm-hmm. So a sense of betrayal of the power of God, or a sense of disconnect, or if God's all powerful, just to really dumb it down, if God's all powerful, why would he hurt me like this? Or why would he allow me to be hurt?
Yeah, or why would he allow this awful world to exist? Yeah. Or, like that kind of stuff, which is a good question.
It's a good question. And if you have that question and you're a moral person and you care, let's say broadly, you want love to win in the world, and you see that love is constantly being overcome or betrayed by the actions of human beings, or just by, the cruelty of the world in general, and you don't have a connection, a deep personal felt connection to love, it could be the case that your mind just says, well, this language of love that we call religion is kind of like hopeful, but it's not real. This isn't true because it's pointing to something that's not there. It's just trying to mold me into a better person, which I can understand. I don't know. I'm just going through different rationalizations where people end up just not needing religion and even seeing the flaws of religion, or even seeing religion as an impediment to bettering the world because of the superstitious nature or the bad interpretations that it can give rise to, because it is written symbolically, no matter how you cut it. Like Peugeot or Peterson would go at it like this is a symbolic thing. So you still have to interpret it correctly, and there's so many other ways of interpreting it to forward or to hide evil, to manipulate people with your will through the gospel, which this is where so many cults come from constantly. So what was and again, this is a really personal conversation, and I can get personal too if you want, just so we're even. But the change toward re-seeing things differently, or forgiving God or being forgiven, or was there a process of reconciliation, I guess, is what I'm asking about the trauma that you've experienced and your path toward connection.
Yeah, it's a whole process. It's a relationship. And at first, I just questioned, like, am I making this up? Is this just me? That was the biggest one. Am I making this up? Like, is this my fantasy in order to, like, cope with life? Like, that took me a while. And I had to learn to trust God. And I still falter a lot, because when I realized, because it's like, God like directs you to do something, and it's like you choose to follow or not. And then the more I did that, the more I realized that it was leading me down a good path. So that was important. It was like I had to build a relationship that is like, this is, first of all, okay, first I just had to believe that there was something else. That is like a huge hurdle. And it wasn't, it was actual, I don't know how to say this. It was actual, okay, so I didn't realize what was happening at the time, but in hindsight, it was like, it started with what I was mentioning before in terms of getting my system functioning properly. So I started trying to buy more organic food and non-genetically modified food and purifying my water. So it was actually extremely physical. That was like the first like signs I followed. And it also had a lot to do with numbers. So like if I went to the grocery store and I bought stuff that was good for me, it was like I saw I saw like it turned out to like $111 or something like that. And it's like there's this thing in your brain where you recognize patterns, but you recognize it in a different way. And I know this is just going to sound like crazy to people, but I'm just being 100% honest. This was like the beginning. This was like the beginning. Yeah. And I just realized that every time I got like a nudge, it was always to take care of myself more. It was always like, love your body more, or like something like that. And then it was also to like talk to my family about stuff. And what I realized was that when I followed, it always led me down a path of basically being more loving to myself and being more loving to people around me. So I learned to trust, and that took months. It took a really long time. And
was that accompanied by also a feeling of harmony or fitting into the world better? So you mentioned love, and you mentioned kind of like these patterns that you're seeing, like these, with the numbers and stuff, which is kind of silly, but it's just kind of your brain takes note of it. But was it also accompanied by an inner sense of fittedness or connectedness? As you engaged and accepted and followed, was it also you felt more in tune, or you became more aware? Was it like there's other feedbacks too?
Yeah, I actually just couldn't fit it all into this conversation. And I also I'm saying this, and I think part of the reason why this is happening is because it's going to be really helpful for other people who hear this, because they might start having their experiences, and it's good to hear someone else say something so you know that like it's okay. So yeah, I'm gonna say this, but I don't know. It's probably not gonna make sense to you. So when I said that, I don't know if I said this already. It's like my right brain started coming on. So I stopped processing information just through left brain thinking, which is very separation. Like when I see this laptop in front of me, I only think about the fact that it's a laptop and a physical object. Whereas I found out that I could actually process that information in terms of what I associated it with in my mind. So I don't really have any particular association with a laptop, but for example, I'm trying to make something up. Uh, a laptop could have been like the first gift that like my dad gave me or something. So it's really significant in my brain. And so my awareness could be drawn towards the laptop, and there's like, oh, laptop, but then also gift. Like, I don't know how to explain this. And that's like the other part of my brain processing the information of a laptop in front of me.
Yeah.
But it's way more than that. But that's just like yeah.
Yeah, just using that as an example, what I'm going to abstract from that, which is the left brain thing, that you became more aware of the connections. That it just sounds like your mind was being purified, and you were becoming aware of this network effect of associations that included use and let's say what a thing is definitionally, but also the meaning in things. It seems like meaning became more alive, more integrated into your life. And we do have to preface this that you have always already been an artist. So you've always been entreating that and communicating through the world that way. But that became more alive, you're saying, and more present in your day-to-day life as you followed your guidance?
Yeah, because I actually think that is part of how God in an ideal world communicates to all of us. Because you can't really access that part of your brain when you're constantly like worrying about how much money you need to make and like making a schedule for your day. And that's why a lot of, I think this, religions ask you to meditate, or not necessarily religions, just like, to be more in touch with yourself. And then like the Bible talks about fasting and praying. It's because it's like you're accessing more of that part of your brain, and then you can communicate, you can get communication that's actually always there, which is why I said at the beginning, like, if the world was working the way it needed to work, no one needs to tell anybody, explain any of this stuff to anybody, because we would all be connected, because that's to God, because that's the way we're meant to be, I think. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
No, it does. I'm just associating too the left brain or the modern mind. Where we are right now is that we've tapped into the amazing vast power of problem solving. So we've kind of problematized the world as things to do. Even a schedule is kind of a problemization of time. We're going to cut it up and then figure out all these solutions in order to get things done, which would be the solution. So we problematize and we solve. And because that has unleashed so much power, it's also given us a lot of feedback and connected us to the world in a very specific material way. Like we're really into matter, and we almost kind of think like matter or think through matter all the time. Whereas what you're pointing to, and I believe this is the case too, that we have so much more going on in us, that we don't need to deny the fact that we are rational creatures, or that we need to engage with money and time in the way that we do, without denying that, still within that system, giving ourselves time to disengage and to start to pay attention to other things that are going on, and ourselves too. And what you've been describing, it's very fascinating, because you started with very rudimentary things, just what you put into your body. Something told you change change what you put into your body, change your relationship to your body. And then that led to another thing. And you went from your body, which is yourself, and then to your family. It's like you're being reborn, like very literally, or you're connecting to yourself as you connected to the world. First your body, then your family, and then the rings move outward from there. So
it goes way outward, because then you start realizing that we're actually all connected, and that's why we're supposed to love one another. But we can't see that when we're coming from a place of being separate, which is okay. We are individuals. Like, it's not to say like we don't have boundaries. I'm completely against that too. But then that's when you start feeling the whole unconditional love for everyone and everything, and then that's what started making me want to make different choices with like what I'm buying, and like, making sure that everyone's being treated well, and it's a natural effect. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To step back a little bit from this part of the conversation, this happened during your kind of book study or exploration of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. So you're looking at, and I couldn't get too far into that book because it's such a heavy book. I'm kind of sensitive in that way. I should, man up and really dive into it. But you're looking at some really horrific conditions. So what is the relationship between that and becoming awake in this other way to your own personal reality? How did that interact with your awakening?
I don't have a...
Was it arbitrary then?
Well, I don't believe that there's there's such a thing as a coincidence. Yeah. Like, there is no such thing. I think that now. It's just the timing was just really interesting, because I read in the book how Solzhenitsyn rediscovered God in prison, and then
What, can you recount that story?
Well, he was sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted, if you want to retell that story in your own words.
Solzhenitsyn?
Yeah, his awakening, yeah.
Well, he doesn't talk about what must have happened to make him disconnect, but it's clear that he was disconnected and then found God again. And it was just when things were really, really hard. I'm trying to remember. I think it was part 4, or where I do the 4th video. Or the 3rd video, I can't remember. And he has a poem where he puts into words God of the universe. I think that's the word he used. I don't remember, but it was just something like praising God. And just, by the way, I also finally understood the concept of worship, because I didn't even understand that. I thought it was just weird. Like, why are you saying thank you and to some being that doesn't exist? But I finally understood that, and there's a poem where Solzhenitsyn kind of worships in the book.
What do you mean you understand it? What is worship? Or that time?
It's like loving on God. That's the right way to put it. It's like returning the love that you receive. It's like you can't help it, because you're like, oh my gosh, you're like the spirit that's in everything, literally everything and everyone. And you care about me. And you're this all powerful, intelligence, blah, blah, blah. And you care about me. I can't fathom this. What can I do but say yes to you being in my life, and wanting me to go down a certain path, which this path I think is the highest possible expression of you as an individual, and then also say I love you too. So that is what now I understand that. I seriously didn't, and I know it just seems strange to people when you don't understand, and that's okay, because I think we all have our own time.
Yeah.
Okay, where was I? So Solzhenitsyn. So in that chapter of the book where he talks about this, he describes how prison is so dark that it separates people from those who are on a descending path and those who are on an ascending path. And you meet yourself face to face, because you see the depths of darkness to which you can fall, because you're being forced in this situation where, in order to make it, you have to decide between yourself and someone else. And some people decide that, they're going to like treat someone else badly or take their life or whatever the situation might be. And so you have to make that choice, and that brings out spirituality in people because you're in that situation, or the opposite where you descend is the word he uses. So
okay,
yeah.
You make me think of a thought. Sorry, you're giving me a lot to process here. So the derivation of ethics in that situation comes from like a choice. Or a calculus, maybe you could say. But you have to appeal to power. At some point, you have to appeal to power. Your ethical choices have to be hung on a hook. And in that situation, I guess you could say myself, or the survival of myself, or surrender to the higher power. Maybe? Like you're brought down to a very elementary choice between ascending or descending. And the principles of ascent and descent, in my own experience, have to do I pin my reality and my value on myself and my will and my survival and all that encapsulates, or do I offer that and allow the chips to fall or to float or to rise, as the case may be. And in a situation such as Solzhenitsyn is describing, there's no time for a philosophy lecture. There's no space for this. There's no couch to be a philosopher on. There's only the brute reality of human suffering, human cruelty, and the possibility of grace. But grace is only available to those who kind of make the decision to allow that to happen, which means kind of a faith or a denial on some level of will. That's the kind of the framework I'm working through. But what do you think?
I think you brought in some terms like grace and faith that to me sound very Christian, and I feel like we would need to define them for people listening. But I'm not sure if I want to get into that because that's like kind of big, like talking about grace and faith and.
Well, you just brought up the Lord of the universe, and now you don't want to.
yeah, but the terminology is like grace and faith. They're very specific terms.
Yeah. But it's made really simple and very stark in that moment. If you're in a prison and the soldier says, "Shoot your neighbor in the head, or we will shoot you," right, or something like that. Tell on your enemy, and you get an extra bit of food, or don't, and then you get less food. Something like that. Where it's like you have to make an ethical choice. And in that, what I mean by grace is very specific. It's that somehow your burden is released even though it's getting harder. Somehow more power is given to you. And not power in the sense of will or control of the situation, but power as in that thing. I don't even have a word for it. That thing that causes things to be alive allows you to be alive too, and to not diminish in the circumstance. Yeah, I guess there are big terms.
Well, I would say God. That's like the simple. Okay. That's the power that allows you to be alive. I mean, it's trying to explain what's not really explainable, but we can try.
Yeah, but in going through that story, you were able to see things, or the reality of things that you had been agnostic to, or unaware of, or had made a wall around.
Yeah, because when I first read it, that portion of Solzhenitsyn's story, that was before my own personal encounter. And then I had to go back because I had this long pause, and then because I didn't feel like doing JTO anymore, but I wanted to finish the series. So then when I went back, I was like, oh, this is so interesting, like the timing, and then I actually realized that Solzhenitsyn was Christian, because I didn't even realize that, even though there are literal Bible quotes in the book, and he talks about God and that. And then I was like, I didn't even realize before. So I did have like a before and after in reading the book. Yeah.
So you were kind of reading it literarily or as a historical document, and then it kind of you saw that there's this other message, let's say, to use a coded term, that was there that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that. How did that change the reading of the book to see it through it as an expression or an extension of the author's faith?
Well, let's see. One, it made me wary of my own pride because I was like, I wonder how many people read this book and not realize that he's Christian, because I was doing that. And then it was like, wow, he like did this work, and now I'm thinking, oh, he was doing God's work. But I didn't realize that. And then I'm like, oh, well, now I'm becoming Christian and God is asking me to do some stuff. And like, that makes me like read and see the world different from other people. And I don't know, something about the book, and then realizing that there was another layer, and then now I could connect to that layer, and then now that would like separate me from other people. And I was like, I don't like the way my brain is going.
Oh,
with
interesting.
This,
so seeing it as a Christian document made you feel like you were being separated from people or different?
Yeah, well, it just made me realize that there was a level to reading this book that I hadn't been aware of, and that a non-Christian reader wouldn't relate to it in the same way. And so then, yeah, it's just your mind, our minds do that, like our egos or whatever. Like,
oh, okay.
So I have to be wary of that. So that was just one thing that happened. Now I forget your question, but what was your question? Because that was an answer to the first part of my answer.
Yeah, the question was just how did it being a Christian document change your reading, and also change what you were getting out of it after that.
Right. Okay, so then that was just the first part of answering that question. So another thing was I realized how intricately my life is planned. Because that's not a coincidence that I would be reading this at the same time that I have my own thing. And I think that's part of what nudges me to wake up, is like seeing, I guess, like the patterns in your life. So that was another thing. And then another thing was just realizing what I realize now about the world, that we're a lot of times when we're arguing politically, we're arguing from the position of just like a secular worldview, but there's like a spiritual aspect to people starting communism and people starving in the millions and that kind of stuff. So it just made me view it from an extra lens, because that doesn't negate how I was already reading it. Like, that's still completely true without, adding the spiritual aspects, but it just made me add another layer to just experience the experience of it. And then I think I mentioned this in my videos, but it also made me wonder, like, what would I do? Because just because I'm like, oh, I'm following God, would I be like those Christians in the book who like died at the very beginning because they just refused to go along and they were like executed? And, so it made me like, yeah, it just made me think about that and wonder if I really had the resolve to 100% like be persecuted if it came to that. And I'm not so sure about that.
You don't know. Hopefully, may God save you from, well, unless you need to prove yourself in that way. But, sometimes we're tested. Hopefully not in a gulag, if we can avoid it.
Yeah, well, no, I don't. So I think that, I'm going to say this, but I think that the world right now, I'm trying to say this carefully, the world has enough good people on it now because we all have free will. So it's just a matter of almost like the balance of power between people who care enough to want to make a change for the positive and people who want things to stay the same. And I now believe, because I talk to God, which I know sounds weird, that there are enough people on the planet now who who will be like making alternative choices, even though it doesn't seem like that on the outside, because the darkness is what makes people wake up. So it's, I don't want to say it's needed, but it's like, that's just how we work. So I'm a lot more positive about that than Solzhenitsyn's time, I guess. I think there's just more people now. So, yeah.
So, in entering into conversations about spirituality, we have to, and you've been doing this, and it's painful to do because it's at a certain point we have to kind of let go of the fact that people are going to be misinterpreting. And there's basically two different types of interpretation. One would be the religious interpretation, and the other would be the a-religious interpretation. And the one that we engage with here is that I know there's a lot of secular people that are watching, and forgive us, we're just using this language and stuff, and I know we sound crazy. And then there's the other side where like, well, you know, there's people who believe in spiritual warfare, but they think that like they go a little bit too far into conspiracy land, and they start to weave these tapestries about satanic pedophiles and how President Trump's going to save the world for us and all this stuff, you know, like, so that language, it's very difficult because it's not the same language that we use every day, and it can be abused, or it can kind of capture the imagination, and people kind of the imagination is what's functioning, and not kind of a very careful view of the world that allows you to understand it as, let's say, a spiritual reality. There's this spiritual reality. There's these other patterns that are going on. So, you know, I hate that we always have to kind of apologize, but I hope that we can just carve out a space to actually kind of engage with these ideas and this language in order to make more sense of it. And also for people, like you said, that might need or be comforted by people in a rational way, speaking about the literal irrational or the super rational life. So the question being, what you brought up, there's a spiritual warfare. Can you kind of distill that a little bit, or maybe just give an example of how you've seen that, because you've been engaging with the culture war. You did this video series about the culture war. So you were engaging it as a commenter, but now you see that there's this other reality that you don't think commenting or arguing is going to affect, but you still see that there's some sort of tug of war that's being played out in our society. What is the core of that, or what are the tensions that we can be paying attention to in order to understand them better?
Okay. So I think that for me, my energy is no longer best spent commenting. I do think that it's useful for people to think on these things, and that's a part of commenting. But I don't think it's useful for people to try to solve it by forcing other people to do anything. So I do think commentary is useful. It's just, I know that that's not where my energy might be best spent. And then in order to actually solve, I don't think it has to do with forcing other people. It's like the actual choices you are making. So
that sounds like we can step back from the spiritual a little bit, because you brought up liberty, or you brought up freedom, and how, let's say specifically, tech is limiting people's freedom. There's something about a core, and you brought up free will too. There's something about freedom, or there's something about your spirituality and your spiritual experience that is giving you some sort of substance or some sort of content to the liberal values of freedom. There's something very important about freedom and liberty that allows people to be as they are to be, to really unlock their true potential. So that sounds like a spiritual value that's translated into a political value that you're seeing a reality to.
Definitely, because if you think of God as love, who created literally everything, but including us, and so we share in the creative process, which is why we have free will. So it's like we're a part of God, but we're not God. We're not, like, we do have to, well, I think it's best if we submit our will, because it's the best for everyone involved, including ourselves. Right. So if God is love and created everyone, then what God's will is for everyone to live out their highest possible potential, but not in a way that stops other people from living out their highest possible potential. So that does directly tie into values of like individual liberty and figuring out how to empower the individual while allowing people to coexist together so that someone isn't being disempowered by someone else's being empowered. So yes, I do think that the spiritual values directly translate into political values, and like that we know this from the founding of the United States, and like a lot of that did have to do with religious or spiritual values. So yeah.
So you start hearing a voice, figuratively or metaphorically, and you are being, your view of the world is being changed. How does your view of, let's say, the religious text, the Bible, start to change? Or do you start reading that differently? Or how do you start reading that differently? What's the difference between before and after?
Well, first of all, I start reading it.
Okay.
I didn't read it before. And I start taking it seriously. Okay. Because I just, you see, it's not really rational. So, like, it's more, okay, so I don't know how to say this. I had a really hard time. I don't really want to talk about this much because,
okay.
All right, I won't get into that. But I started reading it, and then I started realizing that by the act of me reading it, it was me starting to trust, I guess, God, and trust that I would get the information that I needed. So it's just so hard to...
Yeah, this is we're threading a very subtle point here, because you said you were taking the Bible seriously, but it doesn't sound like you're a fundamentalist. It doesn't sound like you're looking for the answer. You're looking for guidance. Like there's like kind of a subtle interaction where it's not like, where's the doctrine that I believe, and then I believe this one thing. You're like, how does this book show me how to live my life?
All right. This is just, I'm going to attempt to explain this, but it's really hard. So, you know, we live in a creation. We live in a process of creation, right? Like, every day the sun rises, and there are like stars in the sky and constellations.
And there's worms in the ground and flowers on the trees periodically.
And there's winter and fall, and then spring, and there's like life with like a man or any creature, really, the male and the female, and there's like insemination, and then there's like life from like a womb. And so like I'm trying to say that there is like this pattern that literally repeats itself in all aspects of creation all the time, and it's about like death and rebirth and whatever. And the Bible, if you think also about like love emerging from darkness, because it's by looking at the dark that you like choose a light and da. So it's like, I just feel like it's the same thing. And the Bible has a story about Jesus, who I actually believe in now, which took me a really, really, really long time. That it's not just a metaphorical story, but that's the part I didn't want to get into, because I'm not trying to convince anyone. I had to go through my own, God, do you really expect me to believe this, that thing? But there's a story in the Bible where a man comes to light the world, you know, and the world is in darkness, and then like there's a light, and you know, it's persecuted and goes into the tomb, and then like emerges. So there is the metaphorical, although I don't just think it's metaphorical, aspect of that, which is why people are so drawn, or I am to that story, because it's telling a truth, because this is literally the creative process that we see go around us all the time, right? So when you read the Bible, and I guess this is the New Testament, but technically it's very similar to some stories in the Old Testament, like Daniel and the lion's den, and then emerging. It's whatever. I think you get the point that I'm making. So when you read it, you're connecting to the source of that truth, who is God. And your mind And this is if your body is working properly. So it's not just left brain thinking, which is like, or I think it's on purpose by people who know more than most of us humans are allowed to understand. You can, I don't know how to say it. You can communicate, you can get more from the text than the literal text in front of you, although it's also a literal story.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm trying.
Yeah, there are these analytic levels that can stack up from literal truth to metaphorical truth to symbolic understanding to ethical suggestion, but you're still saying there's something even more that's being revealed to you, which is that you are a part of this vast, interconnected process of creation. And there's something in the actual text of the Bible that gives you a sense of that, or allows you to connect to that.
Yes. And it also has to do with what I was saying about how God communicates. And there are different ways of looking at it. Like I'm saying right brain thinking, but I've tried to explain it to friends of mine. I also think you can think of it in terms of brain waves and like there are different brainwave states. So like one, I think is beta or gamma is where you're like, that's a problem solving state. And you kind of have to go to the other one, which is you're more in that when you're a child. And then also like when you're going from sleep to wake where you're like you can process the same information, but with from a different state of mind. Mm-hmm. Okay. There was something else I wanted to say just now. I can't remember, but
can I tell you a story?
Yeah, sure.
So my father's a pastor. Well, he was. He's retired now. He's a chaplain. I think he even retired to that. The boomers keep on retiring. They have like 7 or 8 different retirements. They're a weird group. It doesn't matter. He was a pastor. We had Christianity. A lot of Christianity. I had a hard time with the Bible after a certain point because I couldn't read it anything other than him. Like my father, or what I imagined my father to be, was just encrusted into the book, and it was very difficult for me to access anything in that book because it was just like my dad, and I had daddy issues like many people, which have resolved over the years. But it was a few months ago, so rather recently, I was walking around and I was kind of being argumentative with Dad. And it's not my actual father. It's just like, the image of father in my head. And he gives me this Bible. I'm like, ugh, really? I was just like, really? He's like, just, you're having all these problems here. Just read this. I'm like, do I really have to go? He's like, you have to do it. So like, I had to like go away. There's this party. There's like this wedding. There's all these things. And I find this corner and I'm looking through the book. I'm like, I can't. And I got to the Psalms and I opened to the Psalms and I'm like, oh, okay, I can do this. And it's like, cause I can make the Psalm. My relationship to the Bible is creative, and I couldn't deal with it as a text of telling me what to do or an authoritative text. I can only engage with this particular tradition or my tradition or religion itself. I wouldn't say God, because God's a different matter, but religion itself is through the act of creation. And Psalms were where I could actually like participate. It's no longer about me looking for wisdom. It's me engaging in that process, which is a very prideful thing. I'm aware of that. I'm not ashamed of it, but I'm very aware of that. That's it's a block on my development because I'm so prideful. But it was an interesting, that was the last time I interacted with the Bible on a symbolic dream level. So,
thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I almost made a note, but I didn't, and I'm like, I wish I made a note because you said something I wanted to respond to, and I don't remember. But
you
I
don't
do
have
remember.
Your note?
No, I do remember the other thing I wanted to say though.
Okay, good. There we go.
Which was after I stopped being afraid and stopped being like, oh, I was wrong. I was wrong about the nature of reality. I was wrong. Then it started to be, well, first of all, it was sad because then I realized how we're all disconnected when we're not, well, it's not that we're not meant to be, but we don't have to be if we really realize who we all are. But then it was also kind of funny because then I realized that we're kind of playing this game here, like all of us, like as individual consciousnesses, where at a really high abstract level, there's purpose in this, and it's almost like we're here deliberately to forget who we are and to forget God and the love that is everywhere. And then it became a little bit funny because I'm like, when are we going to wake up? Like, how long is it going to take? And then it's also a little bit lonely because I'm like, I can't just interact with the world like this. Like, I can't interact from a literal place of unconditional love all the time. Well, I'm not God once. I can't actually, but you want to do that because what you really realize is like, you just want to love everybody all the time, but you have to like respect people's boundaries. You have to respect people's desire to not love themselves. You have to respect other people's free will. You have to respect your own limitations as a human. Like I'm just a human, and like I have like bad thoughts. You know, like it's not like I'm like all rosy all the time. So there was there's a little bit of fun, is what I'm trying to say, in like that process too. Because yeah.
I don't know why it wouldn't be fun. We are playful creatures. I think if you look at children, one of the most, the child is a metaphor. The child is a concept of Eden or of perfection in a way, and also the child as the reality of what Eden isn't, which is needy and demanding and forceful, willful, not knowing boundaries, being exhausted all the time. But also, if you watch children, and I've watched children, like I've paid to watch children. So I was paid, I had to, it was my job, but also like it was my project because I landed in a preschool when I was 24 and again when I was 27. I'm like, why am I here? Why am I here? It's just like, look at what it is to be human. Like I was told to, or, I had to look at what it is to be human and really connect to that before I could do anything intellectually, before I could do anything important. I had to understand what a human being was. And through play, inventiveness, you see that a child is spontaneous and, we're going through, there's like a waveform of being high and being low, being happy, being sad. You see that humanity is actually, it's not just this stable thing. We're always in flux. But if you take God seriously, if you take spirituality seriously, you can't ignore that it's, you can see it as a war. You can see it as this really dire thing where we are kind of like what Solzhenitsyn said, like the line of good and evil runs through our hearts, right? But also like playfulness is a huge part, is a huge gift. And from playfulness comes all of the most beautiful things that we can produce and we can engage with God through. Cathedrals are playful. Art, music, it's playful. It's just playing with the little ideas. And in play, and being in the state of play, it's not a meditative state and it's not a worshipful state, but it can be. But that's where we start to see that we can actually do something new. We can be a part of God's infinite inventiveness too. And that playfulness, I think, is a component of spirituality that's kind of overlooked because it's kind of childish and silly, but it's the wellspring of all science. It starts with a hypothesis. Even science itself, it has to be playful in order for it to produce and discover the new. So,
yeah, I love that term, the infinite inventiveness. And something that there's a couple things you said. I think I know what I wanted to respond to earlier when you were talking. This issue of people not associating, I guess, God with playfulness. It's because a lot of our humans' religions are very formal and ritualistic. And
somber,
I don't necessarily think that's bad, but that's approaching God from the left side of our brain, I think. And the whole putting God in a boxing, and I don't think it's wrong. And I've talked to a lot of people about music, and I'm really into really formal music, and I'm also really into the opposite, which is kind of my life. I've always been kind of
straight edge and then loosey goosey.
Yeah, accessing, I guess, both. but not with the spiritual part of it. More like the work I did, parts of my brain. The thing with your dad, and I think it's something that a lot of people have an issue with religion because it's just an association. Well, it's not a wrong association. A lot of people have an issue with God because their association with God is only through like their parents and religion. And people are flawed and controlling and manipulative and do whatever they had learned. But when I was on my way to God, like still questioning if I was making stuff up, I did come to the realization that God is like infinite possibility. So it sounded very similar to what you just said. But I think that actually also translates into love because it's desire. Like possibility is like the desire to see something be created. I'm trying to like take this huge thing and like put it into words. And there you can, and then something that's happened to me a lot lately too is I start to see that what seems so divisive is not that divisive. So there are so many different religions, for example, and I think that most of them, how do you say, so it's not to say that I don't have my own belief, but I don't see the incongruity so much anymore the way I see the world now. So yeah, it's like everyone's accessing truth, but from a different perspective. Like another example of that is even scientifically, like I would always hear people talk about vibrations, and energy and whatever, but someone from a Christian perspective, they very often it would just be like woo-woo or whatever. I don't know how to say that. Like, and I understand both perspectives because I think you can be spiritual, but without God, which I don't personally think is the best thing, but we all have free will. So I get that, but I totally now I can see
you can vibe with them.
Well, not vibe, but literally. I can't say scientifically speaking because I'm not conducting any experiments, but I understand now just even the concept of everything is like a vibration. It's not abstract to me. Like I can really see that now. And
well, within Christianity, there's that language. It was spoken about as light, though.
Well, it's not different. It's like light is. I'm not advanced enough to describe this, but how they're like particles and waves, and like it's the same thing, and like we perceive an electromagnetic spectrum, like with our eyesight, we see like the visible spectrum of light, and then there are also sound waves and frequencies, and I don't think it's not any different. Like when if you think of the word as like a sound and like. It all just starts to make sense, and I don't need anybody to explain it to me. It's like I start to like understand this on my own, which is, I think eventually everyone will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the what I've spoken about because in order for me to be doing real work, I have to be making sense out of things. And insofar as I am a commenter, I'm making sense out of things. I'm casting my thoughts into the void, and then my thoughts are coming back to me in the form of attention and people responding to those thoughts. And I can do that in a variety of different ways. One very passive way to do that is through being the interviewer and allowing other people to speak, and then doing the job of being the space around them or being the stage or the stage manager. Then there's the other thing of being the commenter. I have an argument or I just want to riff on this phenomena and I'm making sense of that. But if I really take that job seriously, then I eventually have to say, well, I'm making a certain sense. There's eventually a frame here. There's eventually there's a philosophy or there's something at the root of what I am going toward or working from. And in order to get to that conversation, which would be a meta conversation, would be either going down philosophy or going to, a pattern of interpretation that is found in evolutionary biology, or I go into religion. The problem with religion is that everybody's got opinions on it, and my own journey is very similar to yours. In one aspect is what you've said several times now, is that nobody can tell you this. There's nobody that can tell you this. You either see it or you don't. You feel it or you don't. Maybe every once in a while somebody can speak to this and you see it too. But nobody can tell you. It's like nobody can convince you that sugar is sweet. Nobody can do that. Like either you know it or you don't know it. Either you have that taste bud on or off, or you don't know the concept of what you're tasting is sweet. Now, what you do with that information is a completely different other thing. But to enter into the conversation around spirituality is very difficult because there's the theological way of doing it, there's the evangelical way of doing it, there's the inquiry way of doing that, but ultimately what I've resolved to is what you're doing now or what you're expressing now, which is the testimony, which is this is just what happened to me. And I'm sorry if it offends you or you don't understand what I'm saying, but I have to, it's real. It's my reality. And if God is real, then God is going to be real to people. And then it's going to manifest not only in their words and their stories, but also in their connection to the world, and then how people feel around them and how they change the world for the better, right? That's the proof, that's the fruit, as that one guy, that Jesus fella said.
The fruit of the Spirit, that's probably what they said. Yeah, and that's another thing. I mean, I was always a little bit like this, but now even more so, I don't really listen to labels. I listen to the actual person in front of me. Like, doesn't matter if you say you are good. Like, are you? Or do I perceive that? Yeah. That is what's really important. Yeah.
So, where is your attention directed now that you're? I doubt that you're silencing your voice forever, but you are expressively stepping away from the commentary or the YouTube field. But where are you going towards now?
I'm wrapping up the political commentary stuff or cultural commentary kind of stuff. And I'm really happy I'm doing that. I've done 5 out of 6 videos now covering the Gulag Archipelago, which was just the last thing that I was doing for Just Thinking Out Loud. And I'm so happy that I'm finishing. It was like, it's like an accomplishment. It feels good. I like to start things and finish them, and I like the feeling it gives me when I completed the work. So I'm very happy about that. And then also it's very meaningful because so much of what is in that text, it's just so relevant to what you see going on in terms of politics. And I'm sure that's not, the Gulag Archipelago isn't the only text that does that, but it's a good text. I found out about it through Jordan Peterson. And years ago, 2017, when I started JTOL, and I'm glad that I went ahead and sorry, I'm looking at my hair, and I figured that out. So I'm glad that I'm finishing that, and I'm definitely not going to be silencing my voice. It's just my care has shifted towards making a change in something that I'm in a field in which I'm really, really talented, which is visual art. I paint. It's also something that God asked me to do. So that's why I have confidence to make that transition and know that this is the best path for me. It also seems really obvious if you look at my art that I, should do that. Um, and directly related to what I was saying earlier about alternative choices, in the middle of making this transition to art right now, I found that I couldn't find the kind of products that I was looking for to make art with. So I'm going to be raising awareness about that. Just to give one example is, a canvas. It's usually made from a fabric. Traditionally, that was hemp canvas, and then that changed to linen and cotton canvas. And the textile industry is fraught with coerced labor and child labor and that kind of stuff. And I couldn't find, which is exactly what I'm talking about, products that specified exactly where they got their canvas from, as in the form of a stretcher for an artist. So I did end up finding like 2 places online it's something called GOT certification. I think it's Global Organic Textile Standards. I can't remember what the O stands for. And that's just one example. And I realized that, I'm exactly who I am for a reason in terms of my being sensitive enough to care about this, to put myself into the difficult position, because it is difficult, of trying to do everything the most ethical way possible. It makes life difficult. And I think that's another reason why maybe that's why I was given, do I want to say the talent or the proclivity towards, doing the fine art stuff. And so I am going to be, in terms of intellectually, I am going to be talking about that kind of, but how it relates to art, like stuff that I do. I want to open up through my work to people another way of being creative in a really formal way, which I would say fine art is. So yeah, and that involves a lot of its own research, and I'll probably be sharing information on that.
Are you going to make a resource then, like some articles on that, or a website that just informs people about ethical products in the art industry? Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah. And I also think through like my shows, and because I've never really focused on my art. Okay, I've never tried to really focus on it, and that's what I aim to do now. And so I'm going to be meeting people and interacting with them. I do plan to do articles, possibly some videos. I already have a website. Can I say my website?
Yeah, plug yourself.
So my website is my name. It's desi-rae.com. So I am going to have like blog posts, but then I'm also probably going to try to go on other people, but more art related, kind of like I'm doing here, but more about art shows to just raise awareness, because I really am concerned, because we don't realize how much power we have. Like we don't realize that just in the little purchases that we're making, we're only one person, but that's the most control you have. It's like you can influence people, but it's like you. So I just want people to like wake up to that, and I think one of the best ways I can do that is through something that people will already be drawn to me towards, which is through my art. So, yeah.
You're not done yet, then.
No, I'm just shifting. Yeah. And I want to have a family in the future. I'm not sure when that will happen, but I think that the art will also, fits into that or something. So in terms of the kind of work it is, and, I'm mostly at being solitude by myself, and which I like. I am introverted, in case people don't know that. And yeah, I think I answered the question. I don't know if there's anything else I really want to share. I think there is something else I want to say, which was kind of just to lament a little bit more about the products that we buy, once I started really waking up to it, which I already knew, it's almost like I didn't have the time, or I didn't think I had the time to care enough. Yeah, I was like, well, someone else, we're going to solve this, and we are. And now I know my role in solving that. But I would encourage anyone listening or watching to pay more attention to exactly where their products come from and how people are being affected, and to not beat themselves up if they find something they don't like, but to become more aware, because just by being aware, which I do think is very often purposefully hidden from us, you'll change, because you're like, I don't want to help create this situation. And something that happened was so I was doing research on textiles because I was looking into the art thing, and I bought some linen from this company, and thank God I cared enough to pay attention, because there was this brand from China. There's this company in China that was pretending to be a company in Poland. I'm not sure, like some European country. And then when I actually got the package, I was like, oh, though they lied. It was like a different brand, and they were just lying. First of all, I was nice to them. I said, we all have a part to play in the world that we are creating, which we do, and so do you. Please don't lie about your products. But then I also reported them as well, because I was like, stop doing this, because I don't know anything about this place, and the company that I thought I had been purchasing from, which took me a long time to find, and it was more expensive, which is the thing that's a choice people have to make a lot of times. I was positive of their whole manufacturing process and all of that. And it takes a lot of time to dig in, because we buy so many things and you can only take it one step at a time. But I think that's a really good way to help the trajectory of our world.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's totally capitalist. So nobody's going to not want to be it.
Yeah.
Well, Desi-Rae, thank you for reaching out to me, and thank you for exposing or doing an expose on your trajectory. It's very surprising and heartwarming, and I feel enriched by it. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. It's surprising to me too, by the way. I would never have expected myself to think the things I do now like a year ago. Like, never. So we're in the same boat.
Well, cool. Mind saying goodbye to people at home in the recording?
Yeah, sure.
Just give them a wave or say goodbye.
Bye, and keep in touch, and the other stuff that I do in the future or whatever.
I'll link all of your contact details that you want me to in the description below.
And don't forget to check out the Gulag Archipelago also when it's done.
I'll link that series as well.